Gold and Black Live. We've replaced Stacy with Tom. Stacy's not replaceable, but only for a short period of time. And then Stacy and Kyle will join us in the third segment. But we're in segment 2 for those of you scoring at home. Tom Mitchell, Compliance Director, Purdue Athletics, and we'll have an interesting topical conversation about that. Welcome to the show. And of course, Brian, we have Chiron now, so Brian Newbert, you already know who he is.
I don't even know what that means.
Well, it's a graphic down there.
Okay.
I'm going to do a little bit of business. Our good friends, because as I said, all of our friends in the that advertise with us are good friends, but certainly Christy Coons, Hilton Garden Inn in West Lafayette, when tomorrow's a big day. Stay at HGI tonight. State Farm agent Trent Johnson will be battling that 100-degree heat tonight at some high school football game near you, and he'll be on the sidelines tomorrow with the chain gang in that maybe close to 100-degree heat in Ross-Ade Stadium. But Trent, you can call him right now, or at least after the show, 765-743-9595, or visit him at trentismyagent.com, or you can click on his logo in between segments here to keep yourself amused. And of course, our new sponsor for this year, Jeff Julich and the folks at Follett's Purdue Stores, a game day tradition since 1945, the official outfitters of Purdue Athletics. Tom, welcome, and it's just a boring job that you have anymore in this world of compliance and all that's going on in the world of college sports.
Yeah, there sure hasn't been anything going on the last 12 months for sure.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting 12 months. Really, I been here at Purdue for now 13 months,
yeah.
And just in the last 13 months, a number of major violations or allegations that have been brought about in the media is just staggering. We've just never seen anything like this in the quote-unquote modern era of compliance, where we're federated and split up in divisions 1, 2, and 3, where you've had this many BCS schools with this many major infractions, either violations or allegations.
Is it the tip of the iceberg, or do you expect more, or do you think this is just an anomaly, or is this just the way, is it just more focus on investigation, folks like Yahoo doing the things that they're doing?
I think it's a tipping point, to be honest. I think it's a couple things. In the past, Yahoo or other media outlets might be the one that breaks the story and breaks the investigation. More and more, that's not the case. Enforcement is ahead of the media, and many times, and that's actually due a lot to social media. There's no way to hide anymore. Whereas, like, sometimes you could hide a little bit back in the 80s and maybe even 70s and before, but now people are posting things. They're taking photos on their camera phones. Just all that stuff, all that information that's out there is out there much more quickly and much more readily available, which speeds up the process exponentially.
That was my question, so I'll have to rephrase. How much time do you guys have to spend on Twitter, Facebook, internet message boards, just kind of looking for stuff just to make sure everything's as it should be, or just to see what's going on at other places?
A lot of it we're trying to do. There's a couple ways you can look at it. One, there's obviously the monitoring, like you're talking about, looking at the different athletes' websites. Our communication staff, the sports information staff, helps out with that, as well as the coaches, to try to keep an eye on it and make sure. We have a social media specialist now, Tanner Lipset, who's in our communication staff. He works also with wrestling as their primary contact, but he also does social media, and he does a lot of workshops with the staff, the coaches, and the student athletes on proper ways to use social media, because it can be a great tool, but it can also be a horrible way to put yourself in a bad situation. There's numerous cases of people posting things on Facebook or Twitter, and they think everything's fine, and then just they send it, and it may be something they would never say to their mom, but it's okay to post to millions of people. For the other side of it, it's going to be the education side, and that's something that we're going to be starting to do to try to put the message out there, because what we found is that I have this little sister who's in college right now, and her friends use Twitter to communicate. That's what primarily a lot of the student athletes around the country are doing, whereas there's another layer, another generation where they use it as almost like a news ticker. If you follow the right people, on ESPN or what have you, or someone like yourself, then I can just check Twitter for just those news updates. So we're going to try to take it from that angle and hopefully provide some timely information to our staff and student athletes. But the way it's being used and the way the communication's out there, it gives the enforcement process a whole nother tool. There's actually programs out there that can have you search an entire geographic area of every single tweet, Facebook post, YouTube video, any type of social media that you're not even following. It can just search everything in the ethos. Wow. And it can snapshot it. So if somebody posts something they probably shouldn't have, or definitely shouldn't have, and then they take it down, doesn't matter. It's been captured.
Right.
And it's locked in history. So that can be used, obviously, as part of the investigative process.
Do you find in your time with, in front of the student athletes, the ability to convince them? I mean, it's this perfect storm because you have kids, 18 to 22, that, this is. I think some of the mentality is nothing can hurt me. I mean, I think Purdue student athletes are smart kids in general, but they still have that's just part of the mindset. How much education do you try to do, and do you think because of some of the things that have happened that it's maybe starting to sink in, not just at Purdue but everywhere, that you have to be very careful out there?
Like I said, with all the education that we do, we're very fortunate. We do have great student athletes. They're great people who will make great leaders in the community once they're done. That being said, everybody makes a mistake, or everybody thinks what they're posting is important, and it is. But what we try to impress upon them is that, as a Purdue student athlete, you're at a higher standard, and not just the revenue sports. Now, I don't like that term. To me, I have to treat them all the same. There's no difference between a softball student athlete and a football student athlete, right, and the service that I provide to them. My job is to make sure they're eligible and they're on the field, both ways. So, you have to impress upon them, because if you really look at a lot of the stories that are out there and the problems that have happened, the majority of the major blow-ups where there was a alcohol-related or a hazing incident aren't involving, football, basketball. It's typically involving, a women's sport that's a soccer, field hockey, or a lacrosse. Right. There was a track student athlete situation at Slippery Rock where they had student athletes that were on the road on a road trip, engaged in drinking and some hazing of the younger student athletes. They took shots, of liquor, took photos, and posted them on Facebook. And obviously, they were suspended and kicked off the team and what have you, but they'd made all those poor decisions, and then they recorded them and then posted them for the world to see.
Yeah.
So, you just have to make sure, one, that you recruit good kids and you have good people, but also that you educate them and provide those examples to them to say, let's try to learn from these mistakes of others, and not dwell on them and not laugh at them, but really learn from them and say, what could we have done different to prevent that from happening to us?
Now, I know a lot of times you have to talk in the hypothetical, and there are things you can't say based on things that you're doing in your job. Obviously, the Robert Marv situation in Miami and that allegation that has come out certainly caused a ripple here in West Lafayette, but obviously at Miami as well. But tell us a little bit what you can about that situation, and how has that impacted your workflow and things that you've had to deal with at Purdue.
Well, all we can say right now is that Robert's been fantastic since he's been at Purdue. He's a great guy, great student athlete, great football player. He has no eligibility issues, and we have no issues as an institution. Hypothetically, in regards to that, the case, for any school that's out there, if you're involved in an investigation, you cannot comment about it. It's part of the integrity of the investigation. Mm-hmm. If you're not involved, then you should not involve yourself. You should not comment. And the thought there being, if you're not involved and you start inserting yourself into the process, you're, again, messing with the integrity of the investigation. So, really, there is nothing to say about it from our standpoint, and there's nothing we can say, even if we could say. So it's kind of a funny little paradox. The NCAA has done a good job recently with their enforcement staff in providing some more transparency to the process. They actually reorganized the enforcement staff to move to a couple different types of positions. One that's more of a, they call it, relationship and recruitment. So it's those that'll build contacts in the community. So in basketball, football, to get around and meet AAU coaches, 7-on-7, what have you. And then there's also a processing portion. So now there's going to be hopefully a better way to process cases and coordinate interviewers. And then from the relationship building folks, there's going to be interviewing folks. Folks actually go out and hardcore investigator, if you will, for lack of a better term. They've also been given some other powers. One of the ones that was in the Sporting News, there was an article about limited immunity that the Director of Enforcement, Julie Rolatch, spoke about, that in certain cases, student athletes could be given what's deemed as limited immunity, so that anything they talk about in that enforcement investigation, if it's in the past, is wiped clean, provided they tell the truth, they don't hold back. It's kind of a nice carrot that in some ways is unnecessary, because if a student athlete where an institutional staff member or a coaching staff member, so myself, one of our coaches, a student athlete, is requested to be interviewed by the NCAA, we have to be interviewed. We have to cooperate. If we don't, we're breaking bylaw 10.1, which is ethical conduct. The Ohio State case involving their head football coach and the Tennessee basketball portion of that case involving their men's basketball coach, part of the allegations levied against them was failure to cooperate, which could include lying, it could include just failing to cooperate, not really willing to be forthcoming about what you have. So if we're ever put in that situation, we have to participate, we have to be open and honest. So, you know, the limited immunity is nice in the sense that it is helpful to put the student athletes at ease. Also in the article or the comments from the press conference from enforcement, you know, they made a point to say that they're not saying that any particular group is receiving that, but that is a tool that they now have that honestly really wasn't something they had in the past. They've always had that tool, but it's not something that was used very much at all in the past. You know, and now they've been given some changes in structure so that it's a little bit easier to get that authority, and if need be, they can move forward with it.
Now, Ken Baker asked a question I'm not sure you can answer, but is it a case in hypothetically, but not so, maybe not so hypothetically with respect to Marv, that does Purdue get a letter saying this is how we're going to handle it, or is it dealt with the individual and he says this is the way it is?
You know, it's really
tough question. Can't answer that.
Yeah, it's really something I can't answer. Can't in the sense of I just don't know.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, you know, I'll say that most of the enforcement process is very transparent and is very documented. And if you look at a lot of the articles that are out there on, you know, ESPN typically or CNN SI, you'll see the notice of allegations letter and requests for interviews and those kinds of things. So I would assume that there would be something along those lines if that were the case.
Fair enough. And what about, and Rob Raney asked us the question about what area of compliance is the most difficult? Academics, boosters, recruiting, all of the above?
I think for us, the thing that's always the most difficult is the further out you go. Meaning, if you've got great coaches, if you've got great programs, if you've got quality people and integrity, you don't have to worry as much about the ethical conduct, the integrity issues, or the recruiting, because they're not going to need to break rules to do things. You know, academics, if you have a good, strong academic system, which we do, we have a great academic support system here. If you have a great academic institution, which we're also fortunate we do as well, and you recruit the right kinds of kids that are prepared coming in, you don't have those issues. When you get to boosters, you know, specifically what I think makes the Miami case interesting is that it's difficult for them because the further out you go, the harder it is to control. You can suspend or fire a coach. You can suspend or make a student athlete go to extra study table hours if they're not meeting academic standards. You can disassociate a booster, but you know, short of that, there's nothing you really control over them. You know, we were talking offline about, you know, some of the legal differences between, you know, law enforcement and whatnot, and what the NCAA world is lack of subpoena power. Well, it's kind of the same problem for the institutions out there. It's agents and boosters. There's really not as much control. If it's someone that really does love the institution and went there, more often than not, they're not going to do stuff to hurt the school. They're going to make honest mistakes. You know, and those are the ones you can correct, you stop it, you report it right away, you move on. You know, one of the things, if you look at a situation where there's a violation and a kid gets a violation, if the student athlete and the coach and the institution report it right away and say, as soon as we knew there's a problem, this is what happened, one of the arguments the school can make in getting them reinstated so that they can play in the next game available, whether it be a regular season game or a bowl game, is that they didn't know.
Right.
And when they did know, as soon as they knew, they reported it right away. They didn't deny it, they didn't hide it, they didn't bury it for 2 weeks until after the big game and then tell you. They said it right then and there. You know, so there is latitude and mitigation in those situations. You still may have to do repayment, you may still have to sit, but instead of sitting 2 games, you may sit 1. Instead of missing the next big game, you may be able to play in it, because there is that discretion. The NCAA and the Student Athlete Reinstatement Committee has the discretion to adjust the penalty of withholding, is what it's called, withholding from competition. So it doesn't have to be the very next game. You could play in the next game. You could play in the big game at the end of the year, the Oaken Bucket game. You could play in the bowl game, or they could say you have to sit it. So, you know, it's very important that, you know, we have the education out there to make sure people are aware of it, and it's very important that people understand and I say people, I mean student-athletes, staff as myself, coaches, and alumni and fans and boosters, that if they make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. It's only the end of the world if we bury the mistake and hide it for a few years, and then it pops up later, and you're dealing with what you're dealing with.
It would just seem like there's so much out there you can't control, because you can have good kids, you can have good coaches, but you don't know where people are and who they're around all the time. It's become so easy in social media now for fans to interact with recruits. There's so much money at stake for sports agents, and thus there's probably more of a market for them to come after your guys. Just with everything that's changed, just how hard is your job? With just all the things you can't control.
Well, and you bring up some great points, because one of the things that they've recently, President Emmert, head of the NCAA, just did was had a president's retreat. Numerous presidents from different institutions got together, and that was one of the big things they talked about, was how many rules do we have that we can't enforce, that we can't monitor, and that really aren't benefiting the student athletes. If it's not really benefiting the academic or the athletic success of them, do we really care that they can get fruits, nuts, and bagels, but they can't have cream cheese? We don't care. But that's a rule. We can give them fruits, nuts, and bagels at any time, but they can't have peanut butter on it. That's ridiculous. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Perfectly reasonable to me.
I got a peanut allergy. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
But you have that rule, and in the same book you have rules preventing guys from entering the draft too early. Rules about agents and not signing with agents. So it's a great thing the presidents got together and took a look at that and really had a good heartfelt talk, and they've broken down in some committees. And one of the things that's going to be done different this time with a hard look at the rules is that they're going to involve enforcement staff, because those are the folks that actually go out and investigate, and are going to be the ones to be able to say, we can't monitor that, we can't enforce that. Just like you're saying, with all the social media and everything out there, you can't put your arms around it. It's like trying to catch a bucket of water that's been poured on you. It's already out. You're already wet.
Okay, and we're running a little bit short on time, but a couple good questions that impact at least our message boards from time to time, and not that Purdue's the only place where this happens, but we had a question about some fans wear Purdue gear to high school games with recruits. What are the chances of violations in doing this? I know that has been a discussion point, but how does that? What is the rule with respect to that?
There would be no issue with that.
As long as you don't.
Yeah, as long as you don't actually actively recruit that individual, that prospect. The best thing you can do as a Purdue fan is be a Purdue fan. Wear the gear, go to our games, and if you're in your local hometown and you want to go watch games, then feel free to do so. Where we run into problems, especially, because people are passionate, and that's good. Our fans are passionate, is when it's a higher level prospect that we're looking at. We can't comment about them other than to confirm recruitment. That rule actually extends so far as to say if there is a particular prospect who is the brother of a player on our team, the student athlete can't comment about his own brother. That's how far that rule goes, until they sign an NLI. So the restrictions on recruiting are very specific in that, keep it simple, leave it to our coaches.
Peter asks also, if you see an athlete out at a bar or restaurant, can we buy them food or drink? I think it's almost a rhetorical question, but tell us what the rules are with that. What's the basic premise that you have to follow when you're dealing with prospects?
Well, whether it's a prospect or a student athlete in that situation, if you're buying them food or gifts, you're going to be violating extra benefit rules for student athletes and what's called offers and inducements for prospects. It's the same thing, it's just a different bylaw for recruiting. But essentially, at the end of the day, the way I explain to the student athletes with extra benefits is that the NCAA rules allow for nothing. Nothing's allowed. But there's bunches and bunches of exceptions. There's exceptions that allow an alumni to request an occasional meal from our office to take the team to their house for pizza. So if they live locally, they could do that. We get those from time to time. There's exceptions for the team to get per diem money when they travel, the equipment and apparel and gear that they have that they wear for practice. There's the awards and benefits, complimentary admissions that they get to their home competitions for their family and friends to come to the games. So if you're out there and you buy them a free drink or a free meal, it's a violation of extra benefit rules if it's a student athlete. It's a violation of offers and inducements if it's a prospect. And in that case, that person is immediately ineligible if they're a student athlete to compete for us. And if they compete, we'd have to forfeit those games. Unless we're aware of the violation, report it, and then have them reinstated, and then deal with it accordingly. And if it's a prospect, what hurts us in that situation is that we're not able to recruit them until we reinstate them. And that can be a tricky, slightly more lengthy process.
on the whole thing of, and certainly a national topic about, and maybe under the item of what you can and cannot realistically enforce, but are you a proponent, and this is just one person speaking, I understand, but on paying student athletes? Do you think that does that do anything to help solve this problem?
No, I don't think it does at all.
And why do you say that?
I am a proponent of the cost of attendance. I think that makes sense, that there's a gap from the full grade aid amount to up to cost of attendance. I think essentially, if you just throw money at the problem, that doesn't make it go away. Where I think it could be better would be to reduce the amount of restrictions, again, fruits, nuts, and bagels, to reduce those restrictions and let the institution provide more for their student athletes. Institutionally controlled. So essentially thinking of it this way, yes, it'll be impermissible for Joe Q Public to buy them wings and a soda when they're out, but it wouldn't be impermissible for us as the institution. We could do those things. We could do above and beyond and keep it within, because at least then there's institutional control. Right. And it's an institutional decision. If you want to feed your student athletes as much as you want and they get overweight, well then you're going to suffer on the field. So people aren't going to do that. But they are going to be able to make sure that after every single training activity, I mean, you saw the Iowa problem, the tragic thing that happened with a couple of their players and workouts. There should never be a time where they don't have access to proper fluids and proper recovery, in relation to strength conditioning or practice. So we shouldn't have to discuss whether you can have protein and peanut butter with a bagel. They should just get it if that's what the nutritionist decides. So I think that's where you can loosen those things up. I don't think it's going to solve anything to just pay them. If you really look at the room and board checks that a full grant and aid student athlete gets, and the amount of money that they, or amount of meals that they get, from the team that are permissible. On top of that, they typically could permissibly drive a nicer car than I do and live in a pretty nice place. Because obviously, college living, you're going to live with a couple of people is an option, and cheaper rent. Right. So I think it's going to be more about focusing in on the benefits that we can provide them, because there are quite a few things that we try to do, but the legislatively the rules don't permit, which require a lot of paperwork on our end to try to seek waivers to get things done, when it's really a practical decision. This makes sense. This saves us money. This is in the best interest of the student athlete. Why do we have to even have a waiver for it? We should be able to do it if it's institutionally controlled.
This conversation can go on longer because there's all kinds of topics, but it's very interesting. We appreciate it. We'll probably have you on try to have you on maybe in after the first year or two, and hopefully no more national issues. But there will be something probably, like you said, the world of social media has changed the landscape in a lot of ways. But Tom, thanks so much for being on, and we'll look forward to we'll look forward to watching the kids perform. That's, I think, what it's really all about in the end. So we'll bring Stacy and Kyle back on for their final thoughts, and Kyle's first thoughts on the 2011 season opener against Middle Tennessee State. We'll see you in a couple minutes.